War is full of horrors which play on in the minds of soldiers long after battle is over. In 60 years, some attitudes and treatments for combat trauma have changed, but there is devastation where they haven't. The military are aware of the fallout of combat trauma, but while there is still resistance to tackling the problems, there will continue to be psychological casualties and ruined lives.
There's a role at an even higher level in the organisation for this to be seen to have the importance that other social issues have been given, where it has come right from the top that this is a make or break issue for the military in the 21st century.
Combat trauma is the reaction to an extreme event in battle or a build-up of events over time. Acute stress symptoms can develop up to 28 days after the event.
If the signs and symptoms persist after 28 days, then we talk about post-traumatic stress disorder being a possible diagnosis.
Those who don't receive help often can't get work. They can develop alcohol and drug problems and can end up in prison. And a quarter of rough sleepers on the streets are ex-service personnel. Many of them are suffering with post-traumatic stress disorder. And if the MOD fails to help them, then the National Health Service fails them too.
The NHS is struggling. That's a statement of the obvious. It's struggling across all parameters, but particularly in relation to mental health.
My own view is the NHS psychiatry is particularly good for people with major mental disorders such as schizophrenia or manic depression. I believe it's less responsive to the needs of people with disorders, phobias, depression, panics and PTSD.
And anyway, what are they complaining about? They survived. Look at their mates who've lost limbs or who've horribly burnt who can't see. Or what about the ones who didn't come home? Or if you can't take the heat, you shouldn't have joined. And anyway, it's an MOD responsibility. So there are lots of reasons, I think, why a significant number of my colleagues, both doctors, nurses, social workers, psychologists in the NHS, have a negative attitude to the traumatic neuroses that result from war.
Through the eyes of 3 generations of men, we look at the impact of post-traumatic stress disorder on soldiers and their families, and the extraordinary courage it takes to try and find peace.
It was grotesque, but a lot of war is grotesque.
We were physically fit, mentally fit, strong. What they clearly forgot to do afterwards was turn the light switch down and deprogram us to be a human being again.
It's not right because you've done your bit and they're just thrown in the scrap heap afterwards.
You can't spend all day in a job which is, dedicated to killing the enemy and then coming home and trying to be a well-adjusted Disney dad. It just doesn't work like that.
Although it was officially recognised in England in 1980 that post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, could result from combat, for those who fought in the Falklands conflict in 1982, it was very hard to get help.
Most military psychologists did not want to recognise PTSD. They thought in England or in Britain, UK, oh, we don't have that. Our troops, we're the bravest, we don't have that. Cobblers. We do have it. We're human beings, like anybody else.
There was a lot of sadness in our hearts about the friends we left behind and what was it all for at that period, I do remember one of the last briefings we were given on the boat before we actually stopped at Section 0 was, you will be going home for 6 weeks on leave go home, get drunk, forget about it. And that was all we were told about how to deal with what we'd been through.
Dave Brown was 21 when he returned home from the Falklands. He began suffering with the symptoms of PTSD. He was getting recurring flashbacks.
It's literally like watching a television screen and seeing yourself in the picture, whatever's happening. It's so real. You can hear the people talk around you, you can smell everything, you can hear the sounds. And they're normally very, very just, they come from nowhere, you know. You can get them in broad daylight sometimes. A lot of people say you only get flashbacks at night, but certain sounds, certain smells can set people off.
He was having nightmares too.
I was back on the field of Goose Green. There were a couple of incidents that I remembered actually happening during the battle that were coming back to me on a regular basis. I fell into a trench and landed on top of about 6 or 7 dead Argentinians. And at first I thought one of the lads had done it as a joke, so I was fuming. Because I'd landed literally in this trench with dead Argentinian soldiers, and I was on top of them all. And I could see their faces, well, they were like wax dummies. And parts of them were still soft and squelchy. I could hear someone screaming medic, so I thought, well, I've got to get up now. So I literally stood up and done the fastest 200 metres in my life. I think I'd have had Olympic gold for that one. Because it was just completely open and they were just raking the whole hill with machine guns, mortars, artillery, everything. It was just total helplessness knowing that Mark was dead, whether Steve was going to make it or not, how the hell we were going to get him off the hill and what was going to happen.
He had lost his best friend.
And I remember getting his ID disc. You always leave one ID disc on, you know, so they can identify them and take the other one with you. And that was heartbreaking, cutting that ID disc off. I then put his rifle in the ground, put his helmet on top, and then waited till it got a bit more dark. When sort of like it broke the next day, early daylight, I was still caked in dry blood from Mark. I didn't know that. Someone actually thought I'd been wounded, you know, and I said, no, I'm all right. We looked back over the open slope and saw, you know, the devastation that had hit that hill that we'd gone across in daylight.
When the Argentinians surrendered, Dave Brown found something extraordinary amongst their abandoned weapons.
I found this tape of the Emperor Piano Concerto, Beethoven's, and I thought, right, I know I'm doing here. I wanted to get away from all the carnage, the smell of battle, you could smell the death, everything, you know. So I took a walk back up the slope, sat there with Walkman and played this tape. I felt at peace, just being able to sit on that. I'm surrounded by all this debris and carnage. And I'd got this one piece of music. And I sat and played this tape, and I kept rewinding it and playing it. And just looked around and thought, yeah, I've survived. You know, and the relief, after so much helplessness, the actual relief that that was it, we were all going home now. You know, we'd done our bit.
PTSD is not something young recruits joining up expect to experience. Neither do their families. Reece Laker's father, Jim, was 16 when he first joined the army in 1976. and life was good.
He was very confident, active. He had lots of mates. He was just a typical young squaddy, you know. He was a very good father. He had excellent principles, moral standards. He was very compassionate and loving towards me and my mum. You know, he'd teach me, sit down, he's very patient. Just what you'd expect from a classic dad, really. It was Northern Ireland which was what I consider to be the catalyst. It planted the seed of his troubles. Parachute regiment, I mean, Northern Ireland political situation, especially back in the 70s, for a young guy, it was probably very intolerable, and I can understand the stress they were under. I know a lot of bad things happened in Northern Ireland. We'd have very strange news reports coming through on the radio, on the army radio, like the IRA putting bombs in toys, and I would have been around 4 or 5 when he would start returning home very silent, very cold. It was almost instant, it was almost a snap. Like watching the colours of the rainbow just fade into a grey spectrum. It was very chilling. He had an aura of coldness around him.
The troops who served in Northern Ireland from 1970 onwards were predominantly exposed to some very unpleasant situations, horrific scenes, the result of bombs placed indiscriminately sometimes in the civil population, as well as the carnage wreaked amongst their colleagues.
Reece Laker's father, Jim, brought his family back to England. The bad memories of Northern Ireland were put away. But in 1982, Jim was told he was to go and fight in the Falklands conflict.
He was very happy to go to the Falklands, like a lot of paras were. Like his friends, we remember they were so excited about going and putting their training into the tests. I mean, that's what they're trained for so long to do this. His primary role was to kill. He knew that. He was happy with it. And he did his job like all the other soldiers did. And that's the people get so wrapped up in the trauma and the tragedy of war that they do lose track of the facts that, you know, my dad purposely joined an elite infantry regiment. He purposely chose to do that. He was informed during training that he was going to one day eliminate the enemy and kill. He could have opted out and he didn't. He stuck at it.
The military are aware of the way in which psychiatric disorder can affect combat effectiveness. They will make provision for this in their planning. They are not naive about these subjects. They are often very well informed, and so they should be. But equally, there is an ambivalence about it because, on the whole, soldiers are meant to be tough, manly. They're meant to do this, you know, often absurd job, frankly, and they're encouraged not to show distress. I mean, you know, we're not dealing with social workers here, we're dealing with soldiers. So in lots of ways, the culture of the military is against admitting psychological weakness and distress.
Faced with the mayhem and carnage of war, some soldiers may suffer mental breakdown. The military tried to prevent this happening.
The whole of military training is really about the psychological preparation of people for war. Everything that they do is about generating cohesion. It is about exposing people to adversity. It's about giving people confidence, giving them skills, giving them routines, rituals to do in the heat of the moment. And all of that is about the psychological preparation for a war. Now, it doesn't involve getting lectures in psychology from people like me or my colleagues. And quite right too, that would be silly, and they would eat people like me for breakfast. But what else is training but the psychological preparation of people for the experience of combat?
Both the Royal Marines and the Parachute Regiment put their recruits through the hardest training in the British military, second only to the Special Forces.
Certainly through depot they go out the way to break you. They're deliberately making it as hard as possible they can for you, because they only want the best and people who can handle working under pressure.
Use my kindness!
We may ask people to suppress their emotions, to suppress their fear, and to go on to do an essentially abnormal thing. You and me, facing someone with a gun, we run. That's what normal people do. Normal people acknowledge fear and they bugger off. We have to train soldiers so they do an intensely abnormal thing. They continue to fight and they continue forward.
Historically, the problems of preparing a soldier for the horrors of war has been tackled through physical training. 60 years ago, David Holbrook faced those preparations when he was conscripted at the age of 21.
It was a shock, to be made into a soldier, You had to be toughened. You had to suffer resentment and humiliation, really, before you were considered fit to be acceptable.
Come on! You ain't got time to dilly-dally around. Get in there. Come on then, get your arm all the way in. Get your arm in. 2, 1. Get your hands underneath. Whoever goes through next, your hands underneath. Turn him round. Get your hands in the tunnel, get them underneath. Palms uppermost. Are you ready? Come on, Kelsey. 1, 2, 3, go!
Push him through, grab hold of anything you need to. Good effort, fellas, you're working well.
Come on, sir.
It breeds a capacity for men to take orders unquestionably and to act in a reckless way. I mean, normally you would say, no, I'm not going to go over the top because there's bullets flying about you. But you have to be prepared to face these dangers, and you do it, you become a sort of automaton, really.
On the 6th of June 1944, David Holbrook got the chance to put his training to the test. He was crossing the English Channel, heading towards the shores of the Normandy coast for the D-Day landings.
We were on a ship which was in fact in a long line of ships, and all you could see really was a ship ahead and a ship behind. And we went to bed and amazingly slept and woke up in the morning, and when we woke up there was the Normandy coast with thousands of ships. And there were aircraft, of course, flying over, bombing and so on, great columns of smoke going up. And then ships began to come out with casualties, sort of bundles of corpses and wounded men lying in the bowels of the ship, and shocked-looking sailors running about and so on. And the closer we got to the beach, of course, the more catastrophic it looked. Nothing can prepare you for that. We assumed that there would be casualties, but nothing can really prepare you for the sight of people being killed or dealing with wounded. So this beautiful Normandy countryside became an indescribable place with dead cattle and bodies. And then you would see these wretched men coming out and dying in front of you. You become more grave and responsible, I think. It was a terrible shock to be made into a soldier. Even worse, to be made to face a battle.
In 1982, the aftershocks of battle hit the soldiers returning from the Falklands conflict too. The Royal Marines came back by boat, but the paratroopers, including Dave Brown and Jim Laker, were dropped off on Ascension Island and flown home. They had no time to adjust. It had a devastating psychological impact.
Unfortunately, we realised this somewhat late, so we weren't able to actually look at that as a factor. But a study demonstrated that something like 50% of one battalion of the parachute regiment were identified as having symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder when compared to a similar study done of the Royal Marines, where there was a much less number, would suggest that there was a beneficial effect coming back by sea.
After the Falklands, my dad was very much up and down, but because we were a military family, we were pretty much hidden from open emotion, so we didn't have a clue. So we just considered my dad's behaviour to be eccentric, or him, having a sulky day, or being a moody bastard. So he was up and down after the Falklands, but he still went to work every day, you know.
The stigma of combat trauma has changed little in the 60 years since the Second World War. Like many of his fellow soldiers, David Holbrook refused to talk about his experiences. However, in 1961, he broke his silence and wrote his book, Flesh Wounds.
It must have been in my mind, because when I started, I wrote 10,000 words in one day, you know, which is quite about D-Day. So it was all boiling up. I mean, you know, it was in my mind. And I suppose I put it out there, you know.
Writing the book got the trauma out of his system. It helped him finally to find peace.
There are moments, short moments, from which we never recover. And this few minutes up the beach was one of those for Paul, as it was for hundreds of thousands of men besides. But this first minute's baptism of fire changed Paul's sensibility forever, forever to be a little deadened.
For those who can't find a way of dealing with their emotional wounds, life becomes a downward spiral.
It was noted by more than one close friend up in the north that I wasn't the same David Brown who had gone to the Falklands. They could see something different in me. I couldn't. I said, I'm okay. But my friend's girlfriend I'd known for 5 years, straight away, she even said, "Are you okay?" I said, "Yeah." So even at that stage, friends who I'd known had noticed that I'd changed. But I didn't recognise it.
I'd say it was Bosnia that really pushed him over the edge. The Bosnia was probably for my dad the final spit in the face for him, and that really did unravel everything.
In 1993, Jim Laker was sent to Bosnia for 6 months as part of the UN peacekeeping force.
Coming across mass graves in Bosnia and being aware of the fact that they've been told not to enter into a town, knowing that there is killing of men, women and children in that town. I mean, the sense of impotence that goes with that is horrendous, and that is proving to be catastrophic.
My dad was frustrated in Bosnia because there was nothing he could do, and he was part of the UN, and for my dad, he couldn't stand the idea of being a professional soldier and not actually intervening in a lot of the horrible things that are happening over there.
The hardest bit for most human beings is to handle a dead body. They can accept the sight of it, but it's the handling of it. And a cold body at that, normally when you touch somebody, they're warm. A dead body's cold. But what about when it's mutilated? Or maggots coming out of it? Who wants to do that?
Soon after he came home from Bosnia, we had a really bad day. Everything was fine, you know, he was normal, we were going out of business, dinner was being cooked, you know, we were going to watch TV together. Then the power just went off, everything went dark. So we thought, first of all, there's been a power cut. We looked out the window, the lights were still on, the other houses' lights were still on. Go to leave the house, doors locked. I remember at the time, you know, making out the silhouette of my dad sat on the stairs, you know, staring right at the front door. If you open that door, I'm gonna fucking kill you. I won't really go into details, but crazy things happened, and then the lights just came back on. Oh, when's dinner ready? We're all in complete shock. You know, we're terrified of this man. What's wrong? Why the fuck are you all pissed off? Oh, you know, cheer up. He starts getting annoyed. So it was like that. It was like that for years and years. It was like that.
The key to the whole problem is when nothing's been done, and it's been left to rot inside you for so many years. It's in your brain. It's deep inside you, and because you're not being able to confront it, deal with it, it's too late. It's actually inside you and it eats you alive. It's like a cancer. Had we had the briefings in '82, yes, I'm sure a lot of lads would have had post-traumatic stress. There's no doubt about it. However, they would not have had the disorder which causes all the extra problems. And they'd have been able to cope and manage. So many times people have said it to me, "Oh, I know how you feel." That's the worst thing they can ever say to anyone. You know, whatever combat zone they've been in, you know, how the hell do you know how we feel?
Part of the problem with the veterans, the military veterans who have presented with psychological problems, is their innate belief that civilians won't understand this. They weren't there. And because they are taking that belief with them into the clinical setting, and indeed they may even be reflecting their own negative feelings about themselves. Somehow or other, I'm not as worthy a soldier as I might have been because I've got these problems. If only I had a proper wound, like missing an arm or missing an eye, then it'd be easier for me to talk about it.
Eventually, Dave Brown was put in touch with Dr. Morgan O'Connell at one of the military hospitals, which has since been shut down.
Morgan had noticed that I hadn't shown any emotions. I couldn't cry. There was so much anger inside me still. And we were asked if we would sit in and watch some of the Falcons footage on video. Morgan didn't tell us we had to, but he said he would prefer it if we all did. And I totally broke down then. Thought, that's my mates in there. I said, "Morgan, just stop the video, I need to talk to you now." And for the first time, I'd cried my heart out on that course. I felt so much weight had been lifted that I'd actually been able to cry and recognise emotions again. You feel like you're climbing a mountain. To get over this, you've got no one to help you at all. You're on your own, you're going up this mountain. And every time you think you've just got to the top of that mountain, you either fall off or someone pushes you off that mountain, so you end up at the bottom again. They just give up, you know. And there is absolutely nothing out there apart from the combat stress units, which are privately funded charity.
Combat Stress was set up in 1919 for soldiers with shell shock after the First World War. Now it is used by veterans with PTSD who managed to get a war pension. They are able to come here for treatment for 6 weeks in a year.
When they first come here for the first 24 hours, is they just listen. And having listened, they then discover that, surprise, surprise, there are people talking about themselves, but in the process actually talking about each other, because the stories are so common. And then they have the courage to open up and begin to share their own experiences. And that's really, I think, when a lot of therapy happens.
You're made very welcome because everybody here is in the same boat for one reason or the other. You can choose what you want to do. I tend to stay in my room and read a book, listen to music, or go for walks out on the grounds.
One of the biggest groups in need is made up of those who served in Northern Ireland at the heights of the Troubles. Dave Joseph, a bomb disposal expert, is one of these men. His marriage broke down and he was sectioned twice in his local psychiatric unit before Combat Stress came to his rescue.
Just seemed at the time life just wasn't worth living, just wanted peace and quiet and to stop the dreaming, nightmares. And I tried to take my life twice. Just to end it all, you know, the nightmares and other feelings. But Combat Stress has helped. They've been very good. If it wasn't for Combat Stress, I don't think a lot of the people here would have pulled through.
Unfortunately, not everyone who needs the help Combat Stress has to offer is able to receive it.
It's made so hard by the government to get help for PTSD, for ex-service personnel. Like every step of the way, there's so much paperwork, red tape, that I think they just hope you'll forget about it or die off. Then they won't have to bother. But it is made very hard. And you do think at the start, I can't be doing with this, and just give up. And I think that's what they hope you'll do, because there's no pot of money for ex-service personnel with PTSD and so on.
We're desperately short of resources. We haven't got enough welfare officers. We haven't got enough money, really, to do the work that we need to do.
There's money to go to war, but not to fix the aftermath for ex-service personnel.
In 1995, unable to get the help he needed, Jim Laker left the armed forces.
I think he started to hate what he was becoming, because I think he started to acknowledge it. And he has a lot of resentment, so he thought, fuck this, I'm out of here. Which should have been a good thing, you know? It should have been, it's all over now, you know, things are going to get better. Thank fucking God it's all over, the bullshit's over. I know that this is how he felt. We all felt this way. We were excited, you know, about the prospect of living in a world we didn't really have any experience of. But it all went so horribly wrong, because he was still a very highly trained soldier when he entered the civilian world. You know, he was a decorated veteran, you know, he's a very honourable man, applying for jobs as a security guard for fucking Tesco.
From day one, we were taught, even as young recruits in depot, that apart from the parachute regiment, which was your family and brotherhood, you hated everyone else in the British Army. Everyone else in the British Army was a crap out because they weren't as good as you. You hated civilians, you didn't trust civilians. So from day one, you were bred into this monster, which the MOD created for the purpose. And that was to cause maximum damage, minimum casualties. You know. But how did it expect you then to unwind and come off this plateau?
There is a treatment for PTSD which has been used in America for 15 years. More recently, after initial scepticism, it has started to be used in the UK too. It is called EMDR, Eye Movement Desensitization and Reprocessing.
I began to see more and more patients who'd been exposed to EMDR who found it to be beneficial, certainly as regards imagery of traumatic events. And I now have no hesitation about recommending EMDR to selected patients. And indeed, in this clinic here at Leatherhead, one of our therapists, our art therapist, is a licensed EMDR practitioner and is using it to good effect.
Unfortunately, the National Health Service rarely offers EMDR. However, private clinics, like the Priory Hospital, do offer it as part of their range of beneficial treatments for PTSD.
Approximately 7 years ago, I started using it with my patients and found time and again that it was an incredibly powerful way of addressing trauma, and that it allowed resolution of symptoms in a way that was much swifter and in a way more permanent than anything that I knew from before that. And so I've increasingly been using it in my clinical practice.
The patient is asked to picture the traumatic event and to be aware of how that makes them feel. The doctor moves his finger from left to right in rapid succession. The patient describes how they feel again. After repeating this several times, the picture seems to zoom away in the patient's mind, getting smaller and no longer triggering the traumatic feelings.
And my experience is that rather like doing the ironing, when you've removed a crease from a shirt, it's gone. That crease won't come back.
Nothing like this was available for Jim Laker.
I'm so pissed off that there was no one there to say, okay, it's time to wind down now. You're going to be entering a completely different world. Let's, you know, train you or dismantle you as a soldier and rebuild you as a human being. He did start breaking down. And I don't know, what word should I use? My dad became a complete monster. His humanity just went. His rational thinking left him. He just lost it. Within the civilian world, he just crumbled. And he became just a hate machine. All of the hidden anger, frustration, guilt, all of it came to the surface. He revealed to us that his intentions were to kill us all and burn the house down. He actually sat and told us that in such a calm way, as if, you know, what time's EastEnders on? It was, I'm going to kill you all and burn the house down. This is when we finally realised that he had gone. So he became openly violent and aggressive to all of us.
Reece and his family were in desperate fear for their lives and they fled.
For the first time in his whole life, he was completely on his own and left to think and face up to all of his demons. The walls probably came crashing down. And while we weren't there to hold everything together, you know, the darkness just completely took hold of him and he took his own life.
It's just so heartbreaking, you know, to get those calls. And they get phone calls, you know, to hear that a good friend of yours has committed suicide because he couldn't cope, not just with what he'd been through, but what he'd put his family through. And the only way to end it was to take his life and put everyone out of that misery. Why should it come to that?
There's so many stories of, you know, my dad is not exceptional in the fact that to the general public, he's just another veteran that killed himself, that abused his family, you know, no one really cares.
They put their lives on the line for all of us in our country. Let's give them the best that they deserve, not this latter attitude of, or it can wait, or once they're out the services, they're past their sell-by date, get rid of them. That's not right. That is criminally, morally wrong.
This should have been and could have been prevented years ago and let people live a normal life. It just hurts deep inside, the anger. The suffering I know that I've put my parents through, my friends, you know, everything over the years. But they know that I'm a human being.
It ruined our lives. Just thinking, you know, now as a 26-year-old guy and with the courage and knowledge I have, just every day thinking that, you know, if I could somehow go back there and sit him down when he's having a bad day and say, I understand, you know, I fucking love you, I understand. It's awful having to live with this, it's awful. I can't blame anybody for the fact that my dad killed himself. He chose to do that, but it could have been prevented, you know, if he was given the right help. And they could have helped him, you know, towards the end.
Jim Laker's suicide pushed Reece over the edge.
After I lost my dad, I became homeless, so I decided to come to a local forest area. There was just so much going on in my mind at the time. My family and I were just rowing constantly, and I think I started to have a breakdown. So I packed up one of my dad's old Bergens and came out here, and I stayed here for a good couple of weeks, just on my own, reflecting upon things. Basically, I just needed to get away from everything. it troubles me a great deal, and it's changed my life. I can't live or function to what society would consider to be normal because I have so many emotional problems as a result of all of this, and there's just nothing. It's just all that's left beneath the rubble of everything is just frustration and anger.
There's nothing out there for the partners or the wives or the children either. You know, they can't turn to the mates who were in the Falklands with them or in Normandy with them or at Ireland with them. You know, they've got to get on with it.
After my father's suicide, I just fell apart, but I just considered the way I was feeling to be a character flaw, just as my dad did. This was down to the fact that he was my dad and a role model and everything. So I just I tried struggling on, and I hid it from everyone. I started having panic attacks and stuff. I'd never had these things before, and I thought, oh, I'm becoming a weak person. I'm weak now. I'm pathetic.
The damage caused by Jim Laker's illness led his son Reece to turn to writing music.
Music is my second language, which I became involved in when I was about 6 years old. Basically, it was just my form of escapism, and it took off from there. So I think initially, being around so much disaster, feeling like you had a sense of control over something was quite empowering, and I could communicate my feelings in a world which ignored them.
With his band, the March of the Lunatics, he unleashes his anger at the system that let his dad down.
So it's basically my fist. It's just a big fist smashing down.
As a boy, Reece had never understood why his father had behaved as he did. Now, he decides to search for some answers.
Thanks to the internet, basically, I was just hungry to, make sense of all of the craziness, the madness and everything. So I started posting messages on veteran-related websites. They have message boards, and I'd just put, do you know my dad? Did anyone serve with my dad? What was he like? All kinds of questions, and I did start getting replies. Eventually, I was contacted by Dave Brown. I think he'd read one of my messages, and we started corresponding via email. It was the first time I'd ever heard another soldier be so explicit about post-traumatic stress disorder. He basically was completely honest with me, and it was a huge weight off my shoulders because I didn't feel so alone. I thought, my family wasn't an isolated incident, that this is quite a popular thing. And Dave, he shared so much with me, and then it just proved to me that my dad wasn't just a bastard, basically, that he wasn't a lunatic. So, yeah, that was great. And I stayed in touch with Dave Brown, and that helps me.
The armed forces are still reluctant to face the full extent of PTSD. But the Royal Marines, to their credit, are now starting to tackle the issues head-on with a programme called TRIM.
TRIM means Trauma Risk Management. It's very simple, and it's a peer group delivered scheme for people who have been involved in a stressful incident, to assist them, to signpost them to the correct medical health if appropriate.
The Marines themselves obtain some basic psychological skills, which is pretty crude, to be frank, but we're not talking rocket science here. And then when adversity strikes, the idea being within the companies themselves, then it will be the men themselves who get together and lead groups to talk about it, if they need to do that. And the biggest point here is if they need to do it, and if they do feel the need to do it, they do it among themselves. There's no outsider. There's no suggestion that this is unusual, abnormal, different, needs, a man in a white coat to come along, needs an expert. It's a normal part of life in which, as part of the post-action debriefing, we might as well talk about what it meant to us as well. So it's low-key, normalised within that professional group. And I think that's a sensible way forward.
It has been greeted with considerable enthusiasm by the command structure, normally very sceptical people, as you can imagine. A rough, tough Royal Marine, the last thing he's likely to want to do is to consider himself in need of counselling, whatever that might mean. It's a simple process. It's one that is good for morale. It demonstrates a caring attitude on the part of the command structure. It has no side effects, and it is run by the people for the people. The philosophy, it seems to me, is pretty sound because of its simplicity.
People who get early treatment fare much better. They get their problems resolved much more quickly. They're able to function. They're able to get on with life. They're able to take their place either in the services or in the civilian community. The other side of that coin is people who are left, and they wander around in the labyrinth. They're not picked up. They're not looked after, and by the time they are found and treated, the disorder is so embedded that it's almost impossible to free. And really they are walking wounded for the rest of their lives.
Dave Brown now helps many veterans and their families through SAMA 82, the South Atlantic Medal Association, set up to represent the health, welfare and interests of anyone involved in the Falklands conflict. Every year he goes with them to Arnhem in Holland to commemorate the parachute regiment who fought there in 1944.
It's to remember the old boys and the veterans who actually fought the battle here, who were totally trapped, totally surrounded and outnumbered, outgunned. Everyone says that Arnhem was a failure. If you read actually the mission itself, Tupad's mission was to hold the bridge for 48 hours. They held it for nearly 5 days. We come here every year to honour these brave men who fought at Arnhem and the regiment, which we are very proud of. We were taught, even in the darkest days of Goose Green, we remembered what we're told at Depot, remember Arnhem, and that was even being said in the Falklands. Remember Arnhem all the way through, we will not be defeated.
For the young Royal Marines returning from the war in Iraq, they now know that if they start experiencing difficulties, they can come forward, get support and move on.
PTSD is not the end of your career. We now understand and accept what it is. If you go and get help, you can be helped out, you can be put back onto the military role again, and you don't have to come out. Because by talking, getting these lads in, talking through it, giving them the support mechanism.
I would like to believe that we've made great strides in understanding how to detect these problems, manage them and treat them over even the last 20 years, let alone the last 50 years, but time alone will tell.
However, the Royal Marines TRIM programme is yet to be taken up across the whole of the armed forces, and there are still large gaps left in the aftercare of veterans, both by the MOD and the NHS.
There is a case to be made for developing some specialist units of care which specifically look at military issues here, the military mental health issues, if only to keep the kind of culture going. In the old days, that wasn't a problem because many of these veterans would still cling to the service hospitals that were dotted around the country. And although officially no longer part of the military, there was a general agreement they would still get their care from Catterick, from wherever. Those hospitals are closed now, so that there isn't the kind of backdoor way in which people can continue to be seen in the military setting. And I think we need to rethink whether or not we still need that kind of provision.
If the issues of combat trauma continue not to be dealt with properly, the knock-on effect is costly.
It's only when my girlfriend, Lindsay, encouraged me to try and get sorted out, because the way I was getting it was just, it limited my whole life, and I was just a real mess, a serious mess. I'd hit rock bottom. It's just made me love my dad more, you know, and it's just made me wish that he was still around, because we would have made quite a good team right now, you know. So if I could go back, it would be awesome if I could just go back and sit him down with a cup of tea and say, you know, we're both in the same boat now, Dad, you know, we can get through this together, but that's not going to happen.
I found that the work I was doing with the veterans and the welfare, organising social events, everything, was my therapy. I was doing something positive. I was helping other people. The lads knew they could contact me. And that was my way of coping and dealing with the issues that had caused me so many problems for so long.
Dave Brown has finally worked out how to live his life in a way that is not controlled by his PTSD.
Brilliant, that, isn't it?
It is very helpful to have a woman who not just loves you but understands and wants to help. My girlfriend Julie from day one has been very supportive and very keen to learn about the problems I've had in the past, so she can help and we can take things forward and have a better life together. You know, if you've got that, you haven't got the isolation. If you're in a settled environment with your partner, that can help. It doesn't drop you back off that mountain again, it helps you push you up the mountain and think, yes, there is a future, I'm happy here.
It took a lot of bottle for me to say to my girlfriend, I'm not the greatest boyfriend in the world, I'm pretty screwed up right now, you know. And she really surprised me and probably saved my life by, you know, being there for me. You live and learn, as they say. And I've lived and I've learned already. I mean, I feel like I've got the soul of a 90-year-old man. But it's all just in the past. And it's, you know, focus on the now.
Maybe the answer lies forward that groups of lads get together and do something. Like, I found that the Guide reunion is one of the probably best group therapy sessions in the whole country. Because everyone gets together up at the Guide. Yeah, they have a few beers, but they're able to go around and sit and talk about stuff, that how things are going, and sometimes lads will pick up something that someone else has said. And I say, you know, what's up, are you okay? You know. And basically it's the network we need to set up now, the contact and the support that these lads have. They just have to come and knock on the door or phone us and we will put it in place for them. But they have to come forward themselves. I've always tried to tell lads three things, and I always remember RAC. Recognition, admission and control. Recognise you've got a problem, admit you've got a problem and control the problem. If you feel yourself in a vulnerable situation, get yourself out of it. You recognise circumstances, you recognise situations. So you try to avoid situations like that can trigger events off and can aggravate the condition. You haven't gone mad, you're not a mental case. You've got a debilitating illness that can from time to time cause little hiccups in your life. But it's not the end of the world when this happens. It's a perfect normal reaction.
Quiet, lads! Absent friends. Absent friends. Absent friends.
These men battle to survive, but there are still many people who are not getting the help they deserve. Their lives are destroyed.